The music of Donkey Kong Country. If I had to wrap up this entire video into a single thesis, it'd be this. The Donkey Kong Country soundtrack is all about the vibes. It doesn't matter what kind of vibes you're looking for. Are you looking for good vibes? What about chill vibes? Maybe you're into, some weird jungle vibes. I mean, I'm not here to judge. But regardless of what mood you're wanting to be in, the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack can help take you there. One of the most beautiful things about music, compared to other art forms, is its innate ability to draw out feelings and emotions in every single one of us, no matter our background or differences. And for decades, for millions of fans across the globe, the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country has been doing just that. Every single song is drenched in personality, atmosphere, and color, making for one of the most expressive and emotional musical experiences in video game history. Donkey Kong Country is widely regarded as one of the all-time greats due to its timeless platforming gameplay and revolutionary graphics. And if there's a third element it's known for, it's undoubtedly its music. I have fond memories of swinging through trees, riding deadly minecart tracks, and flying from barrel to barrel, memories that are all scored to incredible music. And if I were to guess, these are deep, emotional experiences that so many of us share. And because of this, I want to give this game's music the appreciation it deserves. So, right now, I'm going to review, reflect, and celebrate the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country. But before we move along, I think it's important to have a little context. And for that, let's take a look at the back of the box. Donkey Kong is back with a new sidekick, Diddy Kong, in a crazy island adventure. Challenged by the crazed tribe of reptilian Kremlings, they endeavor to get back their stolen banana horde. Armed with lightning-quick moves, chest-pounding muscle, and awesome aerial acrobatics, our duo is ready to face their cunning adversaries. With the help of Donkey Kong's quirky family and his wild animal mounts, they squabble and scamper their way through unending monkey mayhem. I love these 90s game box descriptions. They do everything in their power to get you pumped. I mean, imagine being a 9-year-old and reading this. Chest-pounding muscle and awesome aerial acrobatics in the same game? Anyway, although this description doesn't capture the entire musical essence of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, it does capture the richness of its personality and charm. And now, with this context in mind, let's get into it. Defining Donkey Kong Country's soundtrack by genre is no easy task, given its wide range of featured instruments and various musical stylings. But if I had to place a general blanket genre over the entire soundtrack, I'd say it's primarily tribal ambient fusion music. And now it's quite possible that you're asking, what the hell does that even mean? Well, allow me to explain. It's easiest to break it down into its three separate words: tribal, ambient, and fusion. The tribal aspect of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack refers to its musical foundation, the instruments that are most featured. These instruments include the pan flute, xylophone, and various African percussion, which are all commonly associated with the jungle and tropical climates. Next up, the ambient aspect of the soundtrack refers to its mood and tone. Donkey Kong Country's music is filled with wide and spacious synth pads and other soundscapes, playing a big role in how we feel when listening to each track. And lastly, there's the fusion aspect of the soundtrack. Donkey Kong Country takes its African-influenced instrumentation and its lush soundscapes and fuses them with other genres. There are many points throughout its hour-long runtime that the soundtrack introduces us to elements of jazz, rock, and even calypso-influenced music, incorporating the electric guitar, piano, and Latin percussion instruments. It's really all over the place. But regardless of this, the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack still provides a cohesive listening experience from beginning to end due to its tribal and jungle-like atmosphere setting the core foundation of each track. This is why it comes as no surprise that the soundtrack was primarily composed by the highly revered David Wise. Being an in-house composer for game developer Rare for over 2 decades, David Wise has left his musical mark on games such as Battletoads, Diddy Kong Racing, and in more recent years, Yooka-Laylee. And of course, he's written some of the most iconic pieces for the Donkey Kong Country series, some of which he performs live for fans worldwide, which I just think is awesome. Wise, with some help from co-composers Evelyn Fisher and Robin Beanland, pulled a musical influence from all over the place for the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, which really explains its unique fusion of genres. According to Wise, much of the ambient synth pad soundscapes were inspired by synth pop artists like Gary Newman. And some of the soundtrack's rock influence came from heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden. Yes, you heard me correctly. I mean, are you seriously gonna tell me you wouldn't headbang to this? But when listening to the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack in its entirety, it's clear to see that David Wise's real musical strong suit is ambience, atmosphere, and of course, vibe. To match the game's unique and highly detailed visuals, Wise set out to compose Donkey Kong Country's music with the same attention to detail, resulting in a highly expressive and melodic soundtrack interweaved with deep emotion and energy. Okay, so now we understand why David Wise put a huge focus on depth and feel in his compositions. But as I've said earlier, Donkey Kong Country's music elicits all kinds of different vibes depending on the song. And this raises an important question. How do you evoke specific feelings through music? Humans experience a wide, complicated sprawl of emotions. So how can Donkey Kong's songs resonate with certain emotions over others? Well, it's complicated, and there's no one answer. However, based on centuries of psychological and emotional research, we've found that there are a handful of musical features that are almost universally associated with certain emotions and evoking certain vibes. Let's take a look at good vibes, for example. Songs with good vibes often have moderate to quick tempos, along with major tonality, opting for lots of major chords. Throw in some bright instrumentation and a strong, memorable melody, and you've got yourself the recipe for a song with good vibes. And hey, what do you know? I just perfectly described Simian Segue. Bringing an island and calypso feel, Simian Segue is one of the most recognizable songs from the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. You've got that deep bass rhythm bouncing through the entire track. And the highlight for me is the playful melody duet between the piano and the clarinet. It's almost like you're listening in on a fun musical conversation. It really keeps things light and fun. The good vibes continue with Cranky's theme. The xylophone hops around the entire track while the kick drum keeps time, making for a bright, syncopated rhythm. Taking the melody is the pan flute, adding just the slightest bit of calmness and maturity to flesh out the song's feel. Now, this particular melody phrase is actually a recurring one, first being the main theme of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. This musical process is called a leitmotif, which we will see again later on. Continuing on, we've got Forest Frenzy. Forest Frenzy starts up with the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack's familiar tribal sound, with shakers and congas establishing the rhythm and an isolated flute echoing throughout the track. The music continues to progress until the vibraphone, harp, and flute all take turns playing the melody, which carries a light blues influence. almost like a jungle jam session, which is kind of cool. Another great example of a song with good vibes is Ice Cave Chant. This track rushes along with a quickly plucked harp and melody sequence played on the bells. I see the bells serving two roles in this song. The briskness of the bells gives the song a cold, wintry feel, while the melody itself is hopeful and reassuring, almost as if to say, "Don't worry, we're gonna get out of this blistering cold soon." The intensity of this optimism is enhanced when approached by the song's contrasting second section, which brings in some spacious, ominous strings, and the harp plucks a clashy sequence of notes, adding a feeling of danger and distrust. But the optimism quickly returns to close out the track, making the highs feel even higher. As we're learning, many of the songs in the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack manage to radiate a positive and fun spirit through its various musical choices. But in my opinion, one particular song does it best. Bonus Room Blitz, the epitome of good vibes. The song features a mix of African and Latin percussion, accompanied by an energetic xylophone rhythm, establishing the song's uplifting and cheerful musical foundation. The pan flute takes the melody spotlight once again, playing a catchy sequence of notes that takes Bonus Room Blitz to new heights. Yet, somehow, this track's personality continues to elevate when entering its second section. All melodic instruments take a break, while the tribal percussion section continues to jam along. This goes on for a few measures until we're greeted by an awesome triplet rhythm that transitions us back to the song's first section. I love it. No other song from the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack feels as joyful as this one. Man, the vibes just don't get much better than this. Now, there's one more song from the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack that I would put in the good vibes category. And fittingly, it plays as the credits roll, the Credits Concerto. A rhythmic synth bass rides along throughout the entire piece. This is complemented with a soft and light string section which adds a warm texture to the track. This song also showcases David Wise's sonic attention to detail, with faint, futuristic sounds ricocheting around and echoing drums. These musical elements somehow make the Credits Concerto feel reflective and yet forward-looking at the same time. And when listening in sequential order, this makes for a natural and pleasing conclusion to the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. The soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country just wouldn't be complete without these comforting and good-feeling musical moments sprinkled throughout its track listing. Each of these pieces of music find a unique way to positively resonate with us, giving the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack its heart. All right, now don't get me wrong, it's good to feel good, but sometimes feeling good is kind of boring, right? If there is something else we all need to experience from time to time, it's a little excitement. And we don't have to look too far for that, because the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack is jam-packed with these kinds of songs too. Let's talk about the songs with cool vibes. Though similar to the good vibe songs, the songs with cool vibes are able to stand out from others due to their increased intensity and excitement, drawing out heightened emotions from us, the listeners. When it comes to musical theming, many Donkey Kong Country songs are paired with feelings of enthusiasm, energy, and coolness. Which brings us to perhaps the coolest song in the entire soundtrack. The Donkey Kong Country main theme is one of the most iconic songs in the entire series. It oozes cool vibes, and the song knows it. It's completely self-aware. The main theme starts by acknowledging its musical roots, with a soft, 8-bit melody sequence. And just moments later, the song puts you in your place with a kick-ass drum beat, a driving bass guitar, and synthesized ape sounds, creating a hybrid jungle rock sound. And to top it all off, a wailing electric guitar comes in with one of the most recognizable melodies in all of gaming. And in order to set the stage for what's to come in the rest of the soundtrack, the main theme continues onto a second section, boasting atmospheric synth pads and a haunting synth melody, a notable departure from what we were just hearing. At one point or another, all primary musical and emotional elements of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack can be found in this one song. The Donkey Kong Country main theme is incredibly cool and hard to match, and definitely one of my all-time favorites. And from one heavy hitter to another, we've got DK Island Swing. There is just so much to unpack with this one. First off, DK Island Swing knocks it out of the park with its atmosphere. The song takes its time getting started, opening with a rolling African drum beat, which is followed by bongos and other various percussion instruments, which is then all glued together by the sound of crickets in the distance. It truly makes you feel like you're setting out to explore the jungle. More rock influence is then brought in, as the drum set kicks in with a fast driving beat. And to contrast the heavy bass and drums, there's a thin synth melody sitting on top of the track, backed by a thrilling horn section. But just as you think you've heard all there is to hear with DK Island Swing, it takes a complete left turn. The drums slow down and swing into a more ominous and tribal-sounding rhythm. A haunting horn and string section sit faintly in the distance, and a pan flute echoes a melody that seems to reach no one. It feels so isolating, as if our exploration into the jungle has taken a dark turn, and the fear of the unknown sets in, not knowing what creatures could be lurking behind every corner. What a song. Okay, now when we're talking about cool vibes, you can't not mention jazz. Okay, imagine yourself lounging in a jazz club. The lights are dim. Cigarette smoke fills the room. You walk up to the jazz band, leave them a tip, and say, "Play me the coolest song you know." You got it, kid. Hey, you heard him, boys. Let's hit it. Candy's Love Song is by far the jazziest song in the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, with a busy, riding bass line sitting alongside a swinging brush pattern on the snare. The piano takes the lead, backed by a bright brass section and some woodwinds later on in the track. It's a cool, laid-back sound, which is a great change of pace when placed between other songs on the soundtrack. The jazz influence continues with the poorly named Treetop Rock. This track has no percussion, opting for a repetitive harp rhythm to keep the song's quick swing tempo. The xylophone takes the melody, riffing and ad-libbing between melodic sections, really giving it that jazzy sound. This is followed by a mysterious middle section which breaks the song's tempo and falls into a much dizzier and unsettling kind of feel. You know, these starkly contrasting sections in songs seem to be a pattern in the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. Funky's Fugue. Originally intended for Rare's 1994 fighting game, Killer Instinct, this one is definitely the black sheep of the soundtrack. It takes major inspiration from 90s dance music and house music, the driving beat, the thumping bass, and the syncopated synth rhythms. Oh, and my personal favorite part, the group of men shouting. It's just an odd addition compared to the other songs in the soundtrack. Definitely some cool vibes though, don't get me wrong. Keeping in theme with dance music, there's Fear Factory. It offers a steady dance beat and a fast single-note synth line that drones along through most of the track. The xylophone makes another return, playing an aggressive two-mallet melody line. This one feels intense and full of motion. But this song features one of my favorite moments in the entire Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. The beat abruptly stops, and all we're left with is a haunting synth part and sporadic, echoing piano strikes. It feels like the intensity and motion of the song was just frozen in time, and everything transcended to a higher place. It's so impactful. Afterwards, the beat takes over again. Gangplank Galleon may seem like a strange choice for the final boss music, at least at first. The song opens with a light-hearted, nautical-influenced accordion and piccolo duet. But this track hides a little musical secret. After about 20 seconds, the song begins to transition as the accordion and piccolo fade into obscurity. Things continue to elevate as the strings section begins to swell and the drums begin to fade in. And by 30 seconds, the song's true identity is revealed. And it rocks. Gangplank Galleon features heavy drums, crunchy guitar rhythms, and a screaming electric guitar playing the melody. This track rocks the hardest, and it's not even close. And by being placed near the end of the soundtrack's track list, Gangplank Galleon makes for a fantastic musical climax. Some of the best video game soundtracks offer music that takes us to new heights and gives us energy as we listen. One of the many strong suits of Donkey Kong Country's music is that it does just that. It offers a variety of powerful, dynamic, energetic, and dare I say, cool musical experiences, giving the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack its vibrant personality. One thing that makes us human is our natural ability to pick up on vibes. And though sometimes we may not be able to exactly place our finger on what the vibes are, we most certainly can feel them. This isn't always a pleasant experience either. Have you ever walked into a room right after a couple just had a nasty argument? Or have you ever been at a big family dinner and your distant uncle that you've only met once and you think has been in prison sits next to you and tells you all about his baseball card collection even though you never asked him about it? Even if you haven't experienced either of these two things, I'm betting you can still feel them right now. These, of course, are weird vibes. And I'm sure you can guess where I'm heading next. The Donkey Kong Country soundtrack enters weird vibe territory at some points. So let's take a look. The tracks with weird vibes are usually eerie and unsettling in tone. They're highly ambient and atmospheric in order to paint a vivid musical picture while we listen. Early on in the soundtrack is Cave Dweller Concert. Cave Dweller Concert lives up to its name. I love all of the atmospheric noises. The dripping, fluttering, and shuffling sounds all echo for what feels like an eternity. Musically, it feels like there's little rhyme or reason, making it feel like we've entered this unknown cave completely unannounced. There's a percussive, low marimba playing to evoke the feeling of movement in an otherwise stagnant feeling place. Dark and foreboding synth notes pass through the track after a while. And to wrap up this ambient sequence, Cave Dweller Concert brings a little peace and tranquility at the end. By texturing the piece with bright synth pads accompanied by a calm flute melody. Meanwhile, the dripping, fluttering, and shuffling sounds continue to reverberate throughout this musical cave. Perhaps the best example of tribal ambient music is Voices of the Temple. I feel like this song is equal parts tribal and ambient. The song features light percussion, haunting strings to add texture, and a bleak-sounding pan flute soloing above everything else. It feels ancient and cryptic, as if the track is warning you that you're traversing dangerous, uncharted territory. Continuing to dive deeper into Donkey Kong's darkest musical soundscapes, there's Northern Hemispheres. This one complements the other gloomy atmospheric tracks, but it does do something different to stand out. Compared to any other song throughout the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, Northern Hemispheres introduces the most unique musical ideas within a short time frame. This makes the piece feel unpredictable, further isolating us from any musical comfort we may be looking for. You know, for a game that lets you collect bananas and ride giant frogs, you may be surprised that Donkey Kong Country's soundtrack takes another step into darkness. Misty Menace. Talk about weird vibes. The dissonant, faint synth pads and various industrial sounds clanking around make for a chilling and desolate atmosphere. I feel like there's so much and so little to say about this track, which just further adds to its weirdness. Picking things back up a little bit is Minecart Madness. Whether it's the song's low synth rhythm, its harsh brass section, or its eerie strings, Minecart Madness manages to maintain its daunting tone, all while continuously increasing in its intensity. Until it all eventually comes to an abrupt halt and introduces another leitmotif. This time, reintroducing the theme to DK Island Swing, which allows the slightest bit of comfort and familiarity into the track. What's a video game soundtrack without boss music? Bad Boss Boogie lays down a typical rock beat on the drums, with intense plucked strings and a gnarly electric guitar taking the melody. Although I said the drum beat is pretty standard, the song's revolving time signature is not. It starts in 4/4, then goes to 2/4, and then to 3/4, making the music sound unsteady and unpredictable, a perfect setup for an intense boss fight. Okay, look, I hate to be a downer with the last song in this section, but let's be honest with ourselves here. Sometimes during boss fights, the boss wins. We lose. And during hopeless moments like these, the music makes all the difference. K. Rool's Cacophony takes the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack to its lowest point, with slow synths and strings and a melancholy pan flute melody, mourning our failure. Okay, do you feel that? It just feels weird, right? Awkward and quiet. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. To contrast the energy and mood of the other more exciting and uplifting tracks, the songs with weird vibes fill out the rest of the soundtrack with musical moments that make us feel a little off, uncertain, or sometimes curious, making for a full, dynamic listening experience, and overall, giving the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack its sensibility. You see, the world of emotions and vibes can get a little complicated. Sometimes weird vibes are too much. I mean, sometimes good vibes and cool vibes are also too much. There are plenty of times throughout our lives where nothing sounds better than being able to sit back, relax, and chill. And even though there's just a couple examples, the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack nails it with its chill vibes. The songs with chill vibes play an important role in adding variety and freshness to the overall soundtrack. These musical pieces are largely identified by their ambience and soundscapes, allowing each song to move along at a pace that best complements the depth and meaning of the moods they're trying to convey. I am all about meaningful music experiences, which explains why Life in the Mines is by far my favorite song from the entire Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. Everything about this song connects with me from the moment it starts. The fantastically haunting intro sequence with mysterious synths and tons of various percussion instruments drifting around the track. And then, just as you think you understand what the song is going to feel like, there's a surprising shift in tone. And it's absolutely beautiful. Its somber melody matched with its rich synth textures make Life in the Mines feel equal parts melancholy and serene, striking a perfect emotional balance while listening. This is one of those songs I could never grow tired of. It's just that good. And now, we're here, 21 songs later. And I've got just one final song to cover. And let's face it, it needs no introduction. I wholeheartedly believe the songs from Donkey Kong Country are more than just songs on a video game soundtrack. They are profoundly emotional experiences that reach beyond our ears and resonate with us in meaningful ways. And if there's a song that does it best, it's this. It just wouldn't be a Donkey Kong Country soundtrack retrospective without talking about aquatic ambience. It's one of the most beloved video game songs of all time, and it's easy to understand why. Just like the song title would suggest, everything flows. The chilling synth pads, the fading piano strikes, the faint percussive elements. It doesn't just feel like a presentation of various instruments. Every instrument feels like it's intentionally floating down a musical current as we listen. And of course, there's the melody, and it is breathtaking. The melody brings purpose to aquatic ambience, as if it's guiding the other instruments along as they continue to flow. And what about how distinct and memorable the melody is? Here at VGM Quest, it's no secret how much I love a good, strong melody. And the melody to aquatic ambience, being as colorful as it is practically begging to have lyrics added to it. I'd say it could go a little something like this. In the sea, swimming in the sea, it's only me and it.
Just the two of us.
How can we even breathe?
It's biologically impossible.
But look, with lyrics or not, aquatic ambience transcends the world of video game music, creating a rich, reflective, and relaxing musical experience that anyone can appreciate. Even though it's only a couple of songs, the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack simply would not feel complete without its chill music. While the other tracks approach us with what moods they're trying to convey, these two songs offer us an emotional break, a chance to reflect and feel at peace. Life in the Mines and aquatic ambience are what give the soundtrack its depth, the true soul of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. The music of Donkey Kong Country is bold. It's not afraid to bring us up to its emotional highs, and it's also not afraid to pull us down to its raw emotional lows. And to think that it all came from just a small, gray cartridge. There's a reason why the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack means so much to me. And there's a reason why so many of us across the internet can come together in a comment section and feel an instant connection as we bond over the music and our experiences formed by it. And what is that reason? Well, I think it all goes back to vibes. And it's actually something I've been explaining throughout this video. I said the songs with good vibes give the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack its heart. The cool vibes, its personality. The weird vibes, its sensibility. And the chill vibes, its soul. By showing us its own emotions, the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack is able to effortlessly pull out those same emotions lying deep within every single one of us, giving just the smallest, subtle reminder that we're human. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe and stick around because I have plans to cover a lot of video game soundtracks. But most importantly, I want to ask you this. What's your favorite song from Donkey Kong Country? I would love to know. All right, I'll see you again soon.